Hi, I'm Leslie Burkus, the Executive Director of the Urban and Community Forestry Society. So happy to have you here today. You are here for this month's learning series. And as we get started here, I'm going to share my screen and just do a little bit of overview of the Urban and Community Forestry Society. Some of you have been here before and know more about our organization, but if you're not a member or haven't been around, we definitely want to share the work we're doing for urban foresters across the globe. So again, I'm Leslie with the Urban and Community Forestry Society, and we really thank Bartlett Tree Experts for being our exclusive learning series partner. Together with Bartlett, we share the goal of raising the bar for urban forestry, helping folks know more about plant health and plant science, incorporating speakers because the Bartlett has a wealth of knowledge, and one of their speakers is going to be here with us today, and I'll introduce her in just a second. And overall, we thank all of our sponsors, Bartlett Tree Experts, Davie Resource Group, and EOC. Together with them and our members is what makes this work possible. So if you are a member, we thank you for being here. If you didn't know you could become a member, you can. That is what is the power of an association. Members come together to have their voices lifted, to network with one another, and to overall raise the bar of urban forestry. So hope that you'll join us. End of the year is a great time to join and maybe start the new year as a member of UCFS, and happy to help you along that journey if you have any questions. So we're doing a little bit of introduction here about the Urban and Community Forestry Society. Then I'm going to kick it over to Daria Barar, Managing Consultant of Urban Forestry with Bartlett Consulting and Bartlett Hort Science. And really excited to hear about the Community Forestry Needs Assessment that Bartlett has worked on, a strategy and work or framework for helping you identify how to grow your urban forestry program. Daria is going to talk about transferring the assessment findings into actionable strategies and improved tree ordinances, and designing approaches that build comprehensive or cohesive, inclusive, and resilient municipal forestry programs. Something that we're all looking for. I know it's always a process being improved, and here's one of those processes that we can put into practice and see our urban forestry programs grow. There'll be time for Q&A as well. And then at the very end, we'll be putting a CEU form into the chat so that you can get ISA CEUs. As we're getting started here, we love to hear where everyone's coming in from, so please put your name and where you're from in the chat. We always see great mix of people from across the globe. Quick note, sometimes chat can be a little touchy on Teams, so we've heard that if people leave and come back, sometimes the chat magically works, or you can use the Q&A feature along the top as well. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube. Again, ISA is approved for one ISA CEU, and we will submit those CEUs on your behalf, and the form will be in the chat at the end of this webinar. So if you are new here and don't quite know what the Urban and Community Forestry Society is, our mission is to build the confidence, competence, and camaraderie of all professionals who manage trees and forests to create and sustain more livable communities. Breaking that down further, who are the members? They are the professionals who make and support daily planting and care decisions in communities. So if you've been hired by a city, municipality, county, state, some entity to make a daily tree care decision, you belong here, and those are our members. Daria works for Bartlett Consulting, and she may not be making a daily care decision, but she's supporting the people who do that. So if you work in some sort of private business, maybe for a nonprofit, and aren't making those daily decisions, but are supporting others, you also are helping us grow trees in our communities, and that's who are members of this society. And that's our job to help you feel you're most confident in your decisions. Again, pull you together in a network, be your voice, and help raise the issues that are most important to you. To do that, we have a variety of member benefits and things that we just produce to help make the profession the strongest it can be, including our City Trees publication. I think I've mentioned to a few people, someone on social media recently called it the Rolling Stone of urban forestry. So we have the Rolling Stone magazine of tree people here. We have our Arborist Exchange program, mentorship, our annual conference where all the tree nerds get to come together and learn from one another, our Municipal Forestry Institute, this monthly learning series, and something we're really excited about, and you will be hearing more about this, is our accreditation program for urban forestry programs. So that will be rolled out here at the beginning of the year. We're starting to make the announcements to everybody. And basically, it's 4 standards that will put the stamp of approval on urban forestry work across the globe and saying that these are what the standards are. Here's how we know we've achieved them. And this is what makes a top-notch urban forestry program. So more to come on that, but we're really excited as a way to help push the industry forward, provide you a roadmap potentially if you're looking to improve your urban forestry work, and many more goals and objectives we're seek to achieve with that, so more to come. So that's it. I just want to do a really quick overview because I want to give plenty of time for Daria. If you are a member, we thank you. You, again, are who make this possible. Everything we do is in service to you to make sure that you feel you're most confident in your decisions you make. If you're not a member, you should be because we really want to welcome you to this network and happy to help you in that journey at any time. So with that, Daria, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to kick it over to you.
Good morning. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. As Leslie said, my name is Daria Barar, and I am the Managing Consulting Urban Forester and Arborist here at Hort Science Bartlett Consulting. Today, we are going to go through an introduction, a little bit of a history of California's tree ordinances, going through a little bit of a needs assessment, and then some elements that I see of successful tree ordinances. And then we're going to go through some examples, or what I like to call tree ordinances as community expressions. So I started in the municipal world in 2002, fresh out of college, as an intern for the city of Pasadena. I was with the city of Pasadena until 2016 in the forestry program. And I moved up here to Northern California in 2016, where I've been working with Hort Science Incorporated at the time. We then became Hort Science Bartlett Consulting in 2018. While I've been here, I've had the opportunity to work with a bunch of different communities in the Bay Area on the consulting side, and specifically with the city of Vallejo, Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, Albany, and San Carlos on tree ordinances. And it's been a real pleasure to do that. I'm very passionate about communities and tree codes and otherwise contentious situations. I find that the people who are the most passionate spend their time in these areas. So I really have learned a lot and had a lot of good opportunities, both in Pasadena and here in the Bay Area. At Hort Science, we service the Bay Area. Hort Science Bartlett Consulting, HBC is much easier to say, so I'm going to call it that from here on out. We write tree reports for development. We do monitoring of trees during construction. We are contract arborist for a bunch of different cities. I'll go through the cities that we work with in a moment. We've had the opportunity to draft and revise tree ordinances in a couple of different municipalities. And we've worked with communities to draft and approve management and master plans in different communities as well. And that has really given me an opportunity to see both sides of the coin. I've been able to see from the inside, what it looks like to be a public employee trying to implement an ordinance, and from the outside, from a consultant's perspective, from a developer's perspective, what does it look like to try and go through the process of obtaining permits and different items for trees within that city. And that has given me, I think, a little bit of an opportunity to see some of the pitfalls that I see in different communities. It's also given me an opportunity to really understand the needs of a community and kind of go through and understand how those processes work, both from the inside and from the outside. So we are currently implementing ordinances as a contract arborist in the cities of Berkeley, Albany, Menlo Park, and San Carlos. We see a lot of variation, and we also get an opportunity to see what success looks like, what processes work. I want to get things started by defining what a tree protection ordinance is. So I went to Copilot. Actually, I went to a bunch of different sources, but Copilot had the one that I felt like really resonated the most. So a tree protection ordinance is a local law or regulation designed to preserve and manage trees within a city, county, or municipality. Its primary purpose is to protect valuable trees, especially mature, heritage, or ecologically significant ones, from unnecessary removal or damage, while balancing development and public safety. Here in the Bay Area, and really throughout California, we saw a rise in tree ordinances in the 1980s. The city and staff that were involved in drafting those ordinances have often moved on, as well as community members. And this historical context for why those ordinances were drafted has really been lost over that 45 years. And tree ordinances in the 1980s were really to combat some of the development problems that were happening, right? To preserve and protect trees with relationship to development. Here, at least in the California area, in the 1980s, we saw a huge rise in development, turning agricultural lands or native oak woodlands even into more urban type settings. That was the sort of the 80s and 90s was really that urban sprawl that we saw. So urban areas were getting turned into housing and more urban areas. As we moved into the early 2000s, we really saw a lot more redevelopment, right? So turning what used to be single family residences into more housing into office space, or the opposite, residential housing or office space into residential housing, or, mobile parks into single family residences or condos. A lot of times we were seeing that. As we moved into the 2020s, we really started to see urban areas being redeveloped, right? So development pushing office space into more mixed use rather than just solely office space, pushing tree preservation and protection out to the public right of way, and going zero lot line to lot line on in downtown areas. And in residential neighborhoods, we see a lot of ADUs and accessory dwelling units being placed onto the rears of properties, and tree preservation and protection has had to accommodate that. Begs the question, would we write the same tree ordinance in 2000 or in 2026 that we wrote in 2000 or 1980? I think in most cases the answer is no. But what has our experience taught us? Where has this brought us? Tree ordinances really encompass two domains. One is publicly owned trees, trees between the sidewalk and the curb, or a lot of communities don't have sidewalks, but the space that is adjacent to the curb, often considered the public right of way, and then trees on private property. I'm actually going to talk about both of those domains. I have examples later in the presentation for both of those areas. So, how do we get started with assessing needs for our program? I really encourage folks to start to look at their program from an outsider's perspective and start to try and look at your program by blocking off some time to listen. So what is your staff talking about? What are your community partners discussing, talking about, learning about, wanting or needing? And then also, what are your council members? Or if you have a tree board that you staff. I know that contentious communications can be had between those folks, but it is really important to stay connected to what they are seeing as well as you, because they are an ear to our communities. Ask yourself and your staff some list of questions that will help assess the needs of your program. One of the main questions I think that can help us get started is, what is the impetus for change, right? Why is now the right time to make a change? Is the change that is needed internal? Do you have staff members that aren't performing where you need them to be? Do you have a council that is not, that has different values in that than what your staff are trying to implement? Then I would ask yourself and your program sort of some everyday work questions, right? So, what are the pinch points of your program? And what are the groups of trees that may be causing problems? I see that a lot in California. We have a long history of planting trees that are not compatible with urban areas, or that were planted. I think a lot of folks struggle with this throughout the country, but trees that were planted that are just mature tree size is too large for the area that it was planted in, right? So we see blue gums, for example, planted along a right of way that really only has 2 or 3 feet, and those trees have outgrown the area that they are allotted, their planting space. Ask yourself, where is your staff spending their time, right? That can be a real indicator of a problem area. If someone is spending 10 hours a week on working with a particular group of trees or community, that can be a real lag on your program. Ask yourself where you're spending your funding. If you are spending funding pruning all of your Chinese elms every single year rather than in other places, maybe that's something that needs to be addressed. Then some big picture questions come into play. Are your community values being represented? And I know that this is kind of like an esoteric question, but maybe some more specific questions to ask yourself and ask of your program. Are enough trees being protected? Are there too many trees that are falling through the cracks that are not being protected? Or is construction not being managed, overseen by an arborist? Or are you preserving and protecting too many trees? Is there too much press on development, and there's a need to sort of be more flexible? If housing is a priority, we see housing in California as being a major priority in a lot of communities. And how is that defined in your tree ordinances? Can these issues be resolved or changed with policy rather than a code revision? Right. So there's a lot of things that you can do as a staff to make some decisions and change your process rather than going through an entire tree ordinance revision. I'm going to talk later about an example that I think really, hopefully I'll remember to say this is the example I talked about earlier. But I think that's a real, there's a difference, right? There's a need. Some places there's a real need for a code change, and other places there's not. Do you have to build a new ordinance, or can you revise the one that you have? So those are some big picture questions. Another key piece of understanding the needs of your tree ordinance and such is understanding how your tree ordinance may or may not relate to other documents that the city has already adopted. Right. So there's a huge push in a lot of cities in California to have things like a climate action plan, or a vision plan, a master plan. There's a lot of precise plans that cover how trees and development are supposed to look in a certain area of town or a downtown area. I know in Pasadena, I think we had 7 specific plans that covered different areas of town. In Mountain View, there are several that cover particular areas of town. So those documents need to relate to any tree ordinance that would be passed. And of course, climate goals are very important. A lot of climate goals have tree canopy cover that is required or is a goal of the city. Those need to be part of your plan. The other thing that I noticed was that in Menlo Park, we worked, one of the key pieces of our ordinance revision project there was to make sure that the solar ordinance was in line with the tree preservation ordinance. I think another thing that Southern California cities, especially along the coastline, deal with is view ordinances. How can that relate to your tree preservation ordinances? We also see that in the Pacific Northwest. People really want to see the ocean. So how does that relate to your tree ordinance? So I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about what I have seen as success in the world of tree ordinances. What has worked well? When an ordinance is working well, what does it have? It has clarity. I cannot stress this enough. If this is the one point you take away from today's talk, it's been successful. Clarity is so important, and it really comes through in almost every aspect of implementing a tree ordinance. It is a huge piece of a foundation of a tree ordinance and community. So I see communities' successful tree ordinances defining protections, responsibilities, and penalties, and being very clear about those. I see successful ordinances setting standards that relate back to our best management practices and set standards for removal and planting and replacement. I see successful tree ordinances establishing a review process, which is very important. Who are these permits going to be reviewed by, and who is going to be the one to sign off on them, etc. And I see those successful tree ordinances establishing a funding source, right? So if you're talking about trees in the right of way, it is crucially important to identify your funding. I see successful ordinances delineate a place for public input. This came up recently with a city we were working with here in the East Bay, where there was a lack of trust that had been built over years of community not having a place to come and sort of hear about and talk about and understand what the tree program was doing. And building that trust back up just by sharing information was a key piece of the success of the program. One thing I see communities have a need for is an appeals process, right? So once your application for tree removal gets denied, who does that deny? Who gets to say yes or no to that? And alternatively, if it's approved and there's community members who are concerned about that approval, who can they go to ask questions of? And clearly define just a city who gets to go to city council, because I think a lot of people want to drop themselves in front of a city council member rather than a community that might be angry with them. I also want to reiterate the importance of pointing back to our best management practices. And these are documents that are revised every few years. And these documents, if we point to them and then say the most recent edition, rather than pointing to a specific edition, we do ourselves a favor, because we don't actually have to revise the ordinance then when it changes. We can just say, well, this is the newest edition, please use it. These documents are vigorously reviewed through our different societies, and if we don't have the opportunity to, it's a key piece of understanding what is the latest and greatest knowledge of our industry. The other thing that I think is a really key piece of a successful tree ordinance is acknowledging the benefits of trees. Right up front, we want to have a statement of acknowledging how important trees are to our community, to the public health and welfare of our community. Now, back to the fun part here. What do we see communities struggling with? I see communities struggling with unclear definitions, right? It is crazy how much time we spend with trying to make something clearer, make something more understandable to our residents, our community members, our developers. And one thing that I've seen is just like, how is a multi-stem tree defined? That's one that has been a pinch point in several different communities I've worked with, both on the city arborist side as well as the applicant side, understanding what is a dead tree, right? So we see a lot of applications for tree removal for a tree that is actually just deciduous, right? So trying to define what is a dead tree. I see a lot of communities using old language, or like we talked about earlier, using best management practices that are old, but using up-to-date language. Old language can be like critical root zone is not a term that is used in any of the best management practices, neither is hazard anymore. So just updating that language can really give you a more successful ordinance. Of course, this is my sort of final thought on key elements of the successful ordinance here, is to, again, really stress the importance of acknowledging the benefits that urban forests provide, and acknowledge that they incur cost, and that benefit doesn't come for free. And who's going to pay for that? I also see a really important piece of tree ordinances is that it reflects the community values. Quick little anecdote about that. We worked with Menlo Park to revise their tree ordinance, and a couple of other cities on the peninsula in the surrounding area just cut and paste their Menlo Park's ordinance. And one of the other cities we work with said, yeah, we wanted to work with you guys in large part because we, use the Menlo Park ordinance that you guys wrote. And it really wasn't as successful in that city because it hadn't been drafted for them. And the pieces of that ordinance that they were using, they were really struggling with, because their city didn't have the same kind of development patterns that Menlo Park did. So those things had to be addressed, unfortunately. I've mentioned it a couple times. Worked with the city of Menlo Park in I think the process began in 2018, but we weren't, I didn't come on board with them until 2019. But the impetus for the ordinance revision was that they had a tree removal application for a tree on private property, and the applicant had followed the ordinance and been successful in getting the tree removal approved. And then it was appealed. And community members in the surrounding community came out. They ended up at 6 different public meetings, and it ended up costing the city over $20,000. The city had to hire experts, both arborist experts and structural, architectural experts, and community members were left frustrated and upset. Through a deeper investigation, so everyone in the city thought that yes, this appeals process is really just not working, right? So we have to revise our ordinance to revise our appeals process. Well, with a deeper investigation, we really showed that the root cause of the appeal problem wasn't the appeals process at all. It was unclear criteria for removal, or criterion for removal. So I brought up some of the criterion for removal before the ordinance was revised in 2019. Two of the main contributors to this lack of clarity and such were the species value. Long-term value based on lifespan, growth rate, general desirability of the species. A very, very hard thing to make a finding around, right? Who's going to say, who's God and can say that the general desirability of the species is not good enough? Too unclear of a finding to be made there. As well, ecological contribution, the value of wildlife habitat, shade, food, resources, or ecological balance. How is someone supposed to make a finding around a tree, whether or not a tree meets that or doesn't? In our revision to the criteria for removal, we changed both of those two categories into one. And we thought that the real issue was species, right? So if the tree species was a invasive species or had low desirability, right? So invasive species list is listed in on a website that is reputable, reliable. There's professionals who review it and make changes to it on a regular basis. So we pointed to that, as well as low desirability species gives the administrator or the city arborist some flexibility to add tree species that really aren't successful in Menlo Park at the time of the implement or the application or what have you. And secondarily, we pointed to the administrative guidelines. So those guidelines are very easily changed by staff. It's just hitting print on a PDF and uploading it to the website, and that changes the list of species that are listed rather than indicating which species in the tree ordinance itself, which would require an act of city council to change. So that important distinction there allows a lot more flexibility so that when there's a species that gets taken off the invasive list, we don't have to go back to council to make that change. Very important change for Menlo Park. Another city I've had the opportunity to work with in the North Bay. This is the example I was talking about public tree management here, and a change that was required to an ordinance rather than to a internal staff change or a process change. So in 1958, there was a ordinance that said that the city would maintain trees between the curb and the sidewalk or in the public right-of-way. In 2008, the city unfortunately had to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy and stopped managing trees in the public right-of-way because of a lack of funding. But they did not change their tree ordinance to indicate that. Between 2008 and 2025, staff tried to go to the city council on three different occasions, maybe even 4 different occasions, to change the ordinance to follow the practice of not maintaining trees in the right of way. And all 3 times were shot down by members of the community who would come out and say, we don't want to have to maintain our trees in the public right of way. And city council members who are elected were not very excited about making sure that that happened because they didn't have the staff didn't have any way to say how much that would cost. In 2020, I worked with the city to apply for some funding to assess how many trees were in the public right-of-way. And we were successful in obtaining that grant and were able to come through with an understanding of how many trees were in the city right-of-way in 2022. In 2023, I prepared a report for the city outlining the budgetary needs in order to go back to the what the tree ordinance said to do, which was manage trees in the right of way. And those costs were based on current pruning costs. Our hope is to take that information back to the city council to have them either make a determination to change the ordinance or to provide funding to start maintaining trees in the public right of way now that we have a better understanding of what that funding would be. And the last example I want to go through is another city here close by to my office that we've been working with on a street tree management plan. As a part of that street tree management plan, we did an eye tree analysis of trees in the city and found that 19% of land area was covered with tree canopy. Only 4% of that was street trees. In the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, it called for an increase in tree canopy cover citywide. So our city officials really started to see that even if the city were able to increase their tree canopy by a quarter, right, which is a huge ask, it would be 1%. It would be an increase of 5% to 20%. So city officials really started to understand the need for preservation of trees on private property and hope to investigate that with them in the future. This brings me to what I see communities struggling with and where I think communities are going to be struggling in the future. And I offer these as more where I think these codes are going in the future. I see a lot of communities struggling with enforcement and with consequences, right? Getting that funding back for places where people have violated tree ordinances, et cetera. I see communities struggle with clarity and just really understanding what the code is, both on the development side and on the city side. Yeah, it's a real problem that I see. I see insurance issues coming up throughout the country. Here in the western states, we really see that with fire, people being dropped. Property owners being dropped from their homeowners insurance because of fire risk. It's a huge problem in the western states. And in the eastern states, they have a similar problem that homeowners are being dropped from insurance because of storms or the severity of storms that are coming up, which is anyways, there's a lot of different things that we could discuss around that. And actually, I'm working on an insurance committee through the society to work on insurance issues, and hopefully we'll have some solutions. But at the moment, it's something that I see a lot of communities struggling with. Recently, I was at the conference in November, and I heard Lee Mueller discuss the issue of private property land rights versus tree management, right? So that's not really something I've seen in California, but I definitely am hearing about it in the rest of the country, where sort of private tree protections are being questioned or coming into question just by the fact that people don't, or I guess communities are going in a different direction with private property land rights, which is an interesting change. And I'll be looking for information from you all to see if that's actually happening or not. Today I've covered an introduction. Hopefully you've gathered a little bit of information about California's tree ordinance history and what problem is really actually being solved through tree ordinances. Hopefully I've given you some tips on how to assess the needs of your program. Hopefully you've learned some stuff about successful tree ordinances, and hopefully acknowledging urban forestry benefits and being clear are two of the takeaways. And I've given you some examples of where tree ordinances have really provided a community expression. And I really encourage anyone who is attending today to reach out to me. I really enjoy this work and hope to do more of it in the future, and love to help people solve their tree problems, especially when it comes to tree ordinances. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Carla.
And me, yes.
And
Thanks
you.
so much, Daria. As we're this is time for questions. So please put them in the chat or the Q&A. I see a couple in there now. And as we start getting some more questions rolling in, Daria, I was kind of taken when you mentioned, well, you mentioned multiple times about how we need to be much clearer in our ordinances with language that's being used. And I hope this isn't a dumb question. I'm wondering how people might identify those unclear definitions. I imagine they find them when somebody comes to them and doesn't know how to follow the process, and that is a good way. But is there another, like, if someone on this hasn't had that issue, they start thinking about, I should go and look through my ordinance. Multi-stem probably just is like, we know what that is. How would they identify that kind of thing? Do you have any advice for a review to look for that kind of unclear language?
Great question. You're going to stump the arborist already. No. I think one way to find clarity is to actually just go through it, right? Like have a flow chart. Okay, if I had this issue, if I'm applying for these tree removals, actually just take it through the process. So if you have so a lot of cities have requirements of arborist reports or of things like that. It's so easy to when you get a tree arborist report, it's so easy to see, okay, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. Have someone in your office prepare or provide an example, and then try and take it through the process, right? So then you start to see, okay, I'm not seeing what I need in this area. I'm seeing, there's too much information here. So I know that a lot of cities are moving towards using canopy cover as a replacement, right? So if you have a tree that is 30 by 30 and you're trying to remove it, you have to replace that canopy cover within a certain time frame. So actually work through, what does that look like? How many trees do I have to plant? What does that mean on the ground? And then you can start to see, maybe this isn't the best way to approach it, right? So another one that I've seen is some cities have a matrices for replacement. So work through that process and try and have someone put together a fictitious application and then work it through the process. And what would be the replacement? Well, does that feel fair? Does that feel like a good replacement for the trees that you're applying for removal of?
Thanks, Daria. And I see Sarah Davis mentions adding a definition section to your ordinance. I think that would be really helpful to help identify some of those unclear spots.
Yeah, most ordinances start with a definition section. So I would encourage most ordinances to start with that recognition of the benefits of trees, and then start with a definition section.
Okay.
Then you can really clearly lay out, a pitfall of those definition sections is that sometimes you can define, this is a protected tree, but then you forget to say multi-stem trees as well, or,
I missed something.
Right.
A lot of questions coming in, Daria. One I think might be quick, and it's what is the new term for critical root zone?
Yes. So there's two terms. One is the calculated tree protection zone, and these are defined in the best management practice for trees and construction. I think I have it right here. I could show you the book. Okay, I can't show it to you right now. One is the calculated tree protection zone, which is based on the diameter of the tree and its condition and its species. And then the secondary one is the specified tree protection zone. And that's like, if your tree is growing in a planter, you might not need to know as much about when they're doing work in the street next to the tree versus if the tree was growing in a field, then that critical root zone is going to be a lot different than a tree growing in a public right of way.
Sure.
So that specified tree protection zone is when you're actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of this particular tree needs this distance away from the trunk, et cetera. That calculated tree protection zone is a little easier to do, multiple of them because it's based on this kind of more formula.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Wondering, what do you think the sweet spot is for how often tree ordinances should be revised to ensure community values are represented? And I'm curious
Mm,
because we put this in our new accreditation standards. We had quite the heated discussion about don't open them too often. Wait, you need to make sure you're reviewing them long enough. So I'm
right.
curious to hear what you have to say. What's the sweet
Well,
spot?
I think if something's working well, then why would we revise it, right? So I think that really goes to the what's the impetus of changing. If something is not working, then I would encourage a community to go through the process of trying to revise it to address the problem. But this really comes up when I took the tree and plant appraisal class. The first question that you ask yourself is, what's the appraisal problem? And when I go into tree ordinances, I often start with what's the tree ordinance problem, right? So that can really help guide your entire process. We're trying to solve a problem. So what's the problem that we're trying to
Mhm.
solve?
Yeah.
So I don't think I think it's a waste of time to revise all the time,
Mhm.
but if it's needed, it needs to happen.
And for what it's worth, in the end, for our new accreditation standards, we have that ordinance has been reviewed in the last 10 years. So
Yeah,
at least reviewing it. Originally, we had revised and it was decided, don't, like, if you don't need to, don't do it. So at least,
right.
but looking at what you got there and revise or reviewing at least every
I
10
mean, and
years.
I frankly think that on an annual basis, ordinances should be reviewed, right? It's something that we're working with every day.
Mhm.
And we have the opportunity to see, is this a real problem or is this just this issue? And I
Yep.
think sometimes it can be hard to filter out what's a real problem and what's just this particular issue.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question here. It's going to be about home rule and Dylan's rule, and so I know sometimes that's kind of challenging for folks, but I also got a thumbs up, so I know someone else is thinking about this too. So it's from Melissa, if you can see it there. Can you speak to the challenges and strategies for implementing successful ordinances in states that lack home rule authority? How can local
Mm.
governments navigate state level constraints while still promoting meaningful urban forest preservation? Anything you've dealt with?
Yeah, so I would suggest that you tie it to other goals, right? So if there are designated park areas, you can tie tree preservation to a designated open space, or I'm trying to think of likely these communities that you're talking about don't have climate goals, is my guess. And tying those things to other development issues
Yeah.
could be important. I guess one thing would be each parcel has to have at least one tree in the right of way. It could be like an infrastructure type of thing. I
Mhm.
think also tying things to people really care about property value, and trees do contribute. There's a lot of research that ties trees to, especially mature trees, to property values. And I think in some communities we could tie our trees to property values, we could use that as a successful tool for implementing some more strict regulations. But that's an excellent question, and I'm
Yeah,
really looking forward to hearing other people's perspectives.
yeah, and Melissa, and I'm wondering, and others, I'm wondering if you're thinking about when state over supersedes your local decisions, which is a big weighty thing that I think about a lot too. I think that might be what you're referring to, and we can come back to that for sure because it's something that comes up too often, unfortunately. Um, okay, I see a thumbs up. Let's see here. We got a lot of questions still coming in. So as we approach the top of the hour, we'll likely stay. Daria, can you stay on just a little bit longer?
Sure, yeah.
So we'll end right at the top of the hour, but we might stay on and ask a few more questions here. And we know this is a big topic. We want to keep coming back to this because it's so important to getting our work done. Okay. Can you speak a bit about how you've seen successful ordinances address removal exemptions relative to parcel size?
Mm. Yeah, so I think the question is larger properties with maybe more trees would maybe not have as much protection in certain areas. Is that what you're thinking?
It's from Emily, so if you want to clarify, thank you. But you can answer how you think it's being passed.
Okay. So in Pasadena, the tree ordinance followed zoning codes. So zoning codes is actually a really great way to kind of be more flexible because a zoning code designates an envelope in which you can develop. And the city is kind of supposed to be a little more hands-off when you're working within that envelope. It's when you kind of go outside of that envelope that the city starts to have like more more questions, right? So if you go higher than what the envelope is, or if you go wider than what the envelope is, then the city comes back with more regulations or what have you. So zoning codes can often help larger landowners say, okay, we're trying to designate, a new housing development, and it's going to be in this valley, and we want to place these homes in accordance with some kind of zoning code. That's one way. I know in LA County, as LA County was trying to preserve trees in the sort of areas that have now, I'm sure, burned. But as housing developments were being built in LA County, they were trying to apply zoning codes so that people wouldn't have to go through such a rigorous process with every single parcel, but they could just kind of delineate the parcels beforehand, and then when they got to the actual ground work, they would be able to sort of move stuff around or not.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
I think so. And Emily gave another addition. Our ordinance has the same exemptions regardless of property size.
Mm. Regardless of property size. Yeah, so I mean, stronger protections can yeah, that does make more sense for residential and less sense for commercial. Commercial can be more difficult to work within zoning codes because often zoning codes are less restrictive in than residential zoning codes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how to answer, Emily. I encourage you to reach out to me directly, and maybe we can talk through some of your questions. I'm available by phone or on email.
Thanks, Daria.
Yeah.
Can you identify one or more key metrics that can tell you if your ordinance is working?
Mm. Well, I think a key metric is how many complaints are you getting, right? What or how much time are you spending on something like an appeal or something? How much time is your staff spending reviewing tree ordinance questions, or are a lot of questions coming through that are the same, right? So I think those can be really good indicators. If if your ordinance is working or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, are you spending a lot of time at city council?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and welcome people to chat too, what you might think as a for your own ordinance too, what you would see as a key metric to what's working or what's not too.
Yeah. And also, are you seeing large scale developments removing hundreds of trees, right? I mean,
Mhm.
are you seeing the adverse effects of not protecting enough?
Mhm.
Or are you seeing the sort of benefits of protecting too much?
Yeah.
Um, I know that this doesn't apply 100%, but when I was working in Pasadena, one of the things that kind of was happening peripherally was that we had a very low, I forget what the cost, it's a fee for a parks fee, right? So when you develop multifamily units, you have to pay a fee to the parks, and it was very low for a long time. And development was kind of going crazy. And then the Parks Commission was like, you know what, we're going to raise our fees. And so they did a fees study, and there was a whole thing. And the Parks Commission recommended to the council that they go with the highest fee. And the city council reviewed it and decided to actually increase the fee above what was the highest ceiling in
Mhm.
order to slow development. And that was something that was pretty contentious, and council spent a long time considering. But at the end of the day, that was what they felt like was a good mechanism to slow development, was
Mhm.
to increase funding for parks and then also kind of have the added benefit of slowing development.
Yeah. Thanks, Darian. Carolina has put in one of her metrics, and thanks. Carolina is in Canada, and they use the term bylaw, and we should have mentioned that at the top of our presentation: ordinance in the U.S. and bylaw in Canada, and probably some terms I'm not familiar with across the globe.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
someone from Costa Rica, so I would
yeah,
be
yeah.
very curious to hear what
Mhm.
they are called there.
Well, as we approach the top of the hour, Carla has dropped the link to the CEU form in the chat. So if you are seeking ISA CEUs, please click that and you will we'll submit those on your behalf. And I'm going to keep asking just a few more questions if you're up for it, Daria. I doubt.
Please.
Maybe we'll do one more here. So Jesse asks, and this is going to be about size for tree removal and rules within the ordinance. Can you speak to the benefits or disadvantages of size, DBH, threshold for removal, either with no permit required or approval with payment? Some jurisdictions are moving towards smaller thresholds to prevent a rapidly aging stock of trees. However, small thresholds incur administrative burdens on residents and municipal staff. Have you dealt with any issues around that?
Yeah, I tend to think that we want to try and focus our preservation goals on mature trees, right? Smaller trees are easier to grow in the urban forest, and I think it's an excellent question because you're right. You don't want to spend a lot of time on preserving smaller trees. I think that's what is the right size is not a question that I think applies to everyone. I think every community is different. In the Western states, smaller tree sizes are going to be protected because we just have less tree canopy, right? So mature trees are harder to come by. In the Eastern states, the tree canopy is more mature, and it is easier to find trees with a 30-inch diameter. I think that is a blanket statement that is, I'm sure people can poke holes on it. But I think that's one of those things where the community values need to be reflected. So if your community doesn't have a lot of staff time to be reviewing a lot of applications, then increase the size. And if you're fully staffed up and you have more opportunity to review those applications, then you can feel comfortable lowering the size of a protected tree and protecting more trees.
Mhm.
Hopefully that makes sense to everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is something that we'll want to come back to as well, the preservation and enforcement. You mentioned that in your as one of the uh, pitfalls that we see in communities. And so that's a bit to what you're saying there, Jesse, and I think we should come back to that because it's so important, thinking about how we protect trees. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I know there's a few more questions. We're going to analyze those because, like I said, this is the rules and how we plan for our urban forest is your job. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident in those decisions. And it obviously goes without saying impacts everything you do every day. And if we have strong ordinance and strong rules, then our trees are protected and you have a backbone and framework for which to follow. So we'll look at these more and we'll look to get some more learnings on the books here throughout 2026. I see someone mention that they weren't able to access the CEU form. We'll be following up in an email as well, and we'll help to get you that link in that way as well. So with that, we will wrap, and we'll look to see you at our next Learning Series webinar. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in 2026. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.